Jasmine Crockett entered the budget hearing with a folder of documents. She left having exposed the president's billion-dollar tax breaks. That morning in Washington was heavy, not with rain, but with the weight of what wasn't being said. Room 2123 in the Rayburn House office building was packed tight, yet the silence was thick. Staffers clutched coffee cups they'd long since stopped drinking from. C-SPAN cameras rolled soundlessly. Everyone was waiting. At the center of the long oak table sat Representative Jasmine Crockett, composed in a steel blue suit, her expression broadcasting that today was not a day for polite politics. Across from her sat President Donald Trump. Arms crossed, bravado held in check by the gravity of the setting. Presidents didn't show up to budget hearings. Not personally. But the rumors wouldn't stop. Quiet talk about last-minute changes to the fiscal package. Loopholes. Favors. Trump came to project strength. Crockett came to pull threads. The committee chair rattled through formalities and yielded the floor. The air seemed to tighten. No fumbling, no throat clearing. Crockett leaned into the microphone like someone ready to flick on the lights. In a room crawling with cockroaches, "I'm not here to waste anyone's time," she began. "I have a duty to lay bare a pattern, one that affects every taxpayer in this country. Especially those who don't own skyscrapers in Manhattan or golf resorts in Florida." Heads lifted. Murmurs rippled. Trump's face stayed set, but his fingers began tapping the table. "Last night, I received documents from the Congressional Budget Office," Crockett continued. "These were not previously disclosed to this committee." She held up a thick binder. Internal memos. Flagged communications. A budget appendix quietly edited just weeks before submission. That landed. A few senators straightened a hidden. "In the back end of that budget," she said, "are provisions granting sweeping tax exemptions to luxury real estate developers, several operating through shell LLCs that trace back, directly or indirectly, to Trump Organization affiliates." The room froze for a beat. No one moved. Then Trump leaned forward, pulling his mic close. "This is a disgrace," he barked. "More Democrat lies. Fabricated garbage." Crockett didn't blink. "I'm not finished," the chair weakly reminded everyone about decorum, but it was too late. The tone had shifted. Crockett flipped to a marked page. Her voice never cracked. "We're looking at a projected deficit increase of $312 billion tied to these exemptions alone. These aren't my numbers. They come from bipartisan economists, some appointed during your own administration." Trump tried to interject, but the chair cut him off, giving Crockett the floor once more. She let the silence settle, then delivered the strike. "Since you've chosen to be here, Mr. President, I have one question." She looked up from the papers and met his eyes. "Who is this budget meant to serve? The family struggling with rent in Tucson, Arizona, or your own empire?" A gasp passed through the room. Trump flushed, but Crockett didn't press further. She closed her binder and leaned back, letting the moment hang. The media outside was already scrambling. Inside, the story had only just begun. No one spoke for 10 full seconds. A congressional hearing isn't built for drama, but this felt like a courtroom, a press conference, and a breaking news bulletin rolled into one. Trump didn't answer. He glanced at an aide, then looked down as if brushing lint from his sleeve. But it wasn't indifference. It was calculation. He wasn't ready to take the bait. The chair cleared his throat, rattled. "We'll move to statements from other members." Crockett raised her hand. "Mr. Chairman, with respect, the numbers I've presented require immediate clarification. Before we proceed, I'd like the President to respond directly." An open challenge. Trump took it. Slowly leaning into his mic like a man about to deliver a TED Talk through clenched teeth. "Let me tell you something, Congresswoman. This budget is the strongest, most effective plan this country's ever seen. People are winning. Jobs are up. Taxes are down. America's finally running like a business." Crockett nodded slightly, not in agreement, but in anticipation. He pressed on. "I don't know where you're getting these numbers. Probably some left-wing newsletter. But real Americans, they know better. What you're doing is politics. Tired politics. Applause sputtered from a few loyalists behind him, but something had shifted. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She was surgical, with respect. Mr. President, I don't need a newsletter. These numbers come from the agency your party fought to protect 3 years ago, the CBO. She clicked a remote. A screen behind her lit up with a chart, 2 lines, 1 red, 1 blue. The red shot up. The blue plunged. This, she said, pointing, is what's being funded. And this, indicating the sinking blue line, is what's being neglected. Gasps. Reporters typed faster. A veteran committee member whispered to a staffer, who left the room immediately. Trump scoffed. Charts. Theater. Budget manipulation. Crockett stepped toward the screen and clicked again. An email thread appeared. The names unblurred. 1. In particular, Ark Bayfield, a known Trump economic advisor, CC'd in a conversation about preserving real estate carve-outs for presidential affiliates. Crockett read the subject line aloud. Ensure Section G48L remains untouched before submission. Sensitive items must be shielded. She turned back to the room. This isn't about partisanship. It's about transparency. And every taxpayer watching deserves to know that over $100 billion in write-offs are directly benefiting individuals tied to the president's financial portfolio. A young Republican congressman from Wisconsin shifted uncomfortably. That's when you knew the hit had landed. Trump stared at the screen, jaw tight. I don't know what that is. Could be fake. Could be Russian. No one laughed. That kind of deflection used to draw chuckles. Not anymore. Crockett remained still. It's from your office, Mr. President. Flagged by your own staff. Verified by 2 bipartisan analysts this morning before I walked in. Then she did something subtle. She stepped back from the podium, set down the clicker, and folded her arms. She said nothing, because she didn't have to, and for the first time that morning, Donald Trump didn't have a comeback. Outside the room, the story was already catching fire. Within an hour, newsrooms scrambled to cut the footage for prime time. Social media detonated. By afternoon, Crockett's calm presentation of that email thread hit 2 million views. And in the West Wing, confidence gave way to panic. The day had only just begun. In the Roosevelt Room, Trump's senior advisor Gina Murez was pacing, a phone pressed to her ear while another buzzed nonstop in her other hand. No. No. Do not let him tweet yet, she snapped at an aide. We need confirmation on the leak. If Bayfield's name is on that memo, we can't spin this. Back on Capitol Hill, Jasmine Crockett had just wrapped her post-hearing press statement. No grandstanding, no theatrics. Standing before a sea of microphones and flashing cameras, she spoke with measured calm. I wasn't elected to sit quietly. I was elected to protect the public's money, and that's what I did today. Reporters fired sharp follow-ups. Was this a stunt? Would she be filing a formal ethics complaint? Crockett didn't flinch. We'll handle the next steps with transparency. I don't need to yell. The documents speak for themselves. By 5 p.m., the emails she'd presented were verified authentic. Reuters, AP, and the Washington Chronicle confirmed the thread hadn't been doctored, leaked, or taken out of context. It came from an internal briefing file once shared with subcommittee staff, one that had mysteriously vanished from the public version of the budget appendix days later. That deletion, too, was verified, and then it got worse. A second file surfaced, uncovered by a finance office intern. A working draft meant for internal eyes only. It projected the financial impact if the luxury exemptions remained untouched for 4 years. At the bottom of the page, $1.04 trillion, this was no longer a clerical oversight. It was a scandal in motion. Overnight, late-night hosts pounced. Hashtags like hashtag TrumpBudgetGate and hashtag Crockett vs. Trump exploded online. A Georgia-based economics professor's Twitter thread breaking down how the budget disproportionately benefited the top 1% while gutting infrastructure funds in states like Mississippi, Idaho, and West Virginia racked up hundreds of thousands of retweets. This wasn't just an ethics story anymore. It was arithmetic. And arithmetic didn't take sides. The next morning, Wake Up America, a staunchly conservative Dallas-based morning show, opened with uncharacteristic unease. One host, normally a reliable Trump defender, looked directly into the camera. "I don't always agree with Representative Crockett," he said, "but those numbers, they're hard to ignore. And if it's true billions were redirected to benefit developers tied to the White House, that's not partisan. That's theft." That clip was everywhere within an hour, from CNN to Fox to foreign news outlets. Back in D.C., Jasmine Crockett arrived at her office with a stack of folders under her arm. On her desk, a single message from her chief of staff waited. "Bayfield just resigned." She read it twice. Bayfield, Trump's longtime economic strategist, the architect behind 3 of his budgets and the brain behind the growth-through-cuts model that shaped Trump's fiscal platform, was out. His resignation email, vague and terse, had gone to the press before the White House could manage the fallout. The kind of move made by a man watching a ship take on water. Reporters swarmed outside. Her staff asked if she wanted to make a statement. "Not yet," she said. "Let them talk first. We've got more." Because Crockett knew, public anger had barely scratched the surface. The real damage wasn't in the emails, it was in what those carve-outs had cost. What she didn't know yet was that a price was coming for her too. And not the kind she expected. By noon, the White House press briefing room was jammed shoulder to shoulder. The atmosphere was heavy, not with anticipation, but with blood in the water. The press secretary fumbled notes she hadn't written, reciting answers already obsolete, but Trump wasn't letting anyone else handle this. He strode in himself, no tie, no teleprompter, just a stack of papers and a clenched jaw. He ignored shouted questions until he hit the podium. "Let me be very clear," he began, jabbing 2 fingers into the wood. "What you saw yesterday was the most dishonest, staged disgrace in congressional history. Jasmine Crockett should be ashamed. Coached, scripted, and trying to smear the most successful presidency this country's ever seen." The press erupted. "Mr. President, was the email real? Did you personally benefit from those carve-outs? Has your administration altered official budget records?" Trump's voice rose. "Fake. All of it. Fabricated, taken out of context. Probably by some radical left intern. Political theater. They can't beat me in an election, so they invent scandals." He waved a printout above his head. "This budget saved American businesses. You know who it hurt? China. Do the math." But the room wasn't buying it. Not like they used to. A veteran reporter from St. Louis finally cut through. "Mr. President, are you denying the existence of the email thread? It's been verified by 3 independent outlets." Trump didn't answer. He pivoted. "Look at who benefits when Crockett makes headlines. Look at her donors. Her district. This is about power, not truth." It didn't land. Later that afternoon, a planned softball radio interview meant for damage control crumbled when conservative host Craig Forrester opened with, "Mr. President, I backed your tax policies. But if even 20% of what Representative Crockett presented is accurate, don't the American people deserve an honest answer?" Trump scowled. "You sound like CNN now, Craig." And that was the moment it really began to slip. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett stayed quiet. No posts. No interviews. No podium. She remained in her office, combing through budget oversight printouts. Her phone didn't stop ringing. Her chief of staff came in, face tight. "Your district office was vandalized. Traitor," across the front door. "We've filed a report." Crockett stayed calm. "Keep it quiet," she said, then another update. "Some GOP members want a closed-door hearing. They're pushing for an investigation, national security breach." Crockett arched a brow. "For reading a document they buried?" Her chief of staff nodded. "They're claiming it wasn't properly cleared for public release. Trying to flip it on you." Crockett exhaled, steady. "Let them. Because what they didn't realize was that she wasn't just holding receipts. She was holding the original drafts, line by line, with edit histories and timestamps. Those hadn't seen daylight yet, but they would that night, in Ohio. Trump took the stage for a last-minute rally. The crowd still clapped, still chanted, but something felt different. His speech was angry, his words sharper than usual, but the old fire was dimmer. He railed against fake scandals, called Crockett a radical puppet, and promised vengeance. But behind the bravado was the unmistakable edge of a man chasing a narrative he could no longer control, and in a D.C. hotel room, Jasmine Crockett watched, a legal pad in her lap, face unreadable. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply scribbled 5 words onto the legal pad in front of her: "He's scared." That's my proof, but Jasmine Crockett also understood something else. Fear has teeth, and it wasn't just Trump she had to watch for now. At precisely 8:04 a.m. the next morning, she walked alone into the Oversight and Accountability Committee hearing room, a locked briefcase in one hand. No aides. No press. No tweets or photo ops. Just her and the evidence inside. The air felt heavier than usual. Colleagues avoided her gaze. Those who did speak kept their greetings clipped, polite, careful. Word of the vandalism at her Dallas office had spread, as had the White House's memo warning lawmakers against jumping to conclusions about partisan disinformation. But none of them knew what she was carrying. When the room came to order, Chairman Langford gave her the floor. Without ceremony, she stepped to the table, placed 3 labeled folders in front of her: Draft A, Draft B, and Final Budget. And spoke, "I'm not here to argue. I'm here to clarify. Yesterday, I was accused of misrepresenting budget documents and leaking protected materials. So, I'd like to walk the committee through what changed between these drafts, and who changed it." She clicked her remote. The screen displayed 2 versions of a single budget line item. One dated January 19, 2025, capped real estate depreciation deductions at a standard rate. The other, dated February 6, removed that cap entirely and added a new loophole allowing deferred capital gains reinvestment through certain partnerships, a $47 billion revenue loss over 5 years. Then, she circled a signature block at the bottom of the February draft. Reviewed and submitted by R. Bayfield. No grandstanding. No pause for effect. She moved on, and next came a deeper cut. A line that originally allocated $8.9 billion for school infrastructure reduced to $2.1 billion, the difference rerouted to an urban redevelopment incentive. Vague, until she pulled up a list of beneficiaries buried in the appendix. 3 of the 5 companies listed were subsidiaries of a Boca Raton holding group. A group that, until 2022, counted the Trump Organization as a 12% stakeholder. The room fell into a stunned, brittle silence. Even Chairman Langford's hand trembled against the gavel. "I didn't come here to shame anyone," Jasmine said, steady as ever. "But I refuse to sit quietly while the American people are asked to pay more so billionaires can write off beachfront condos and shuttered hotels." A Republican congresswoman from Kansas, silent through most of the budget debate, cleared her throat. "Congresswoman Crockett," she asked carefully, "are you prepared to submit these drafts for forensic review by the Ethics Subcommittee?" Jasmine met her gaze. "I already did. 30 minutes ago." The impact landed like a physical blow. Aides rushed from the room. Phones buzzed non-stop. Lawmakers who tried to stay neutral realized this wasn't posturing anymore. It was official. Jasmine gathered her folders, let the hush settle, and before leaving the podium, she delivered the line that would dominate the next 48 hours of news coverage: "This isn't about left or right. It's about wrong." The hearing adjourned 11 minutes later, but the story had already escaped the building that night. 60 Minutes opened with a Crockett drops receipts, Trump budget under ethics review. Fox News split coverage. Some anchors questioned the timing. Others, surprisingly, praised her nerve. Point 1, a conservative host out of Nebraska, said it flatly. She walked into that room like a lawyer with a case file, and walked out looking like a prosecutor. Jasmine, meanwhile, refused every interview. No press tours. No speeches. No Twitter posts. She quietly returned to her district, spending the weekend meeting with teachers, small business owners, and retirees. One man, a Navy veteran in a grocery store parking lot, shook her hand. "I don't vote blue," he said. "But I back honesty. Whatever this is, don't let it go." She didn't intend to, but with Bayfield gone, someone else was about to take the fall, and the White House already had a name in mind. By Sunday, her 6-word "closer, this isn't about left or right," had been clipped, captioned, and shared across nearly every major platform. And it wasn't just political junkies paying attention. It was barbershops in Milwaukee, coffee counters in Fresno, union halls in Toledo, churches in Tulsa. Even Saturday Report Live couldn't ignore it. Their cold open featured a parody Trump, surrounded by gold-suited developers high-fiving while a burning budget smoldered in a fireplace. The audience howled, but the laughter had an edge. It wasn't just a joke anymore. People recognized what had happened. The story had legs. Not about policy jargon, about trust. Inside the White House, the mood had turned from defensive to hostile. The press secretary, visibly fraying, pivoted to personal attacks. Representative Crockett, she insisted at Monday's briefing, has a history of media-seeking behavior and releasing documents selectively to serve her personal ambitions. This isn't whistleblowing. It's grandstanding. The accusation collapsed within hours. Crockett's chief of staff confirmed every document had already been filed into the official House ethics record before the hearing. Advance copies had even been sent to select committee members from both parties. One of them, Representative Rebecca Lee Withers, a moderate from Indiana, tweeted late Sunday, "Got the drafts early. Fact-checked them. They hold. You don't have to like her delivery to admit her facts are solid. We've got a serious issue here." It racked up 12 million views overnight, and just like that, the dam cracked. By Monday, several Republicans began publicly distancing themselves from the budget's more controversial provisions. Leaked GOP memos showed lawmakers in swing districts were being advised to avoid interviews and hold back any defense of the deductions until further notice. Behind closed doors, the White House scrambled. And when it became clear they couldn't ignore her, they went after her. An anonymously sourced op-ed circulated, accusing Crockett of hypocrisy for past service on a Dallas nonprofit that once received city tax credits. Thin, but damaging, cable news pounced. Headlines flashed, "Is Crockett clean? The budget bombshell's shadow." Her team responded fast, releasing full IRS disclosures, council records, and internal audits, preemptively defusing the smear, but by then, the story had outgrown the Beltway, and no one, not even the White House, could control where it was headed next. Within 2 hours of the first op-ed hitting the internet, the documents surfaced, showing Jasmine Crockett had stepped down from the nonprofit board 2 years earlier, long before any redevelopment funds were proposed or distributed. But this was never just about proving a point. That afternoon, she went live on local radio. "I've never claimed to be perfect," she said plainly. "I've made mistakes. But I've never profited off the pain of the people I represent. And that's the difference. This isn't about one line in a budget. It's about a culture of secrecy and greed that's gotten too comfortable." The host paused, then said quietly, "You don't sound like a politician." Jasmine smiled. "Maybe that's the problem." The clip went viral. Again. She hadn't planned on becoming a symbol, but the role was finding her whether she wanted it or not. Meanwhile, the House Ethics Committee confirmed it would launch a formal investigation into the Trump budget revisions. A public hearing was set for the following week, and this time, Crockett would be called to testify under oath. Her team understood what that meant. Every word, every pause, every glance would become headline fodder. Still, she agreed. She hadn't come to Washington to play small ball. That night, she called her father, just to hear his voice. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Even when it gets messy. Especially then." She didn't cry. Not then. But she couldn't speak for a moment either. What the public saw was a rising star. What others saw was a threat. And those others were watching, waiting, digging. The ethics hearing was days away, but the real battle had already begun. By Tuesday morning, her office received 2 anonymous packages, one containing a shredded photocopy of her old bar license, the other a single-page letter in block type. "You think this makes you clean?" Her chief of staff pushed to involve Capitol Police immediately. Jasmine agreed, but only after she took a photo of the letter for her own files. She knew how this game worked. Misdirection. Pressure. Make her question herself in private so she'd hesitate in public, but she stayed focused on Capitol Hill. The air had shifted. Conversations hushed when she walked by. Some colleagues who'd been warm a week earlier now kept their distance. Unfamiliar staffers lingered too long outside her office. And 2 members of the opposing party abruptly requested to review her evidence stack, citing transparency concerns. Jasmine didn't flinch. That afternoon, she met behind closed doors with her legal counsel, retracing every document's chain of custody. Every timestamp. Every clerk's signature. It was airtight. It didn't matter. At 6:42 p.m., her phone rang. Senator Clay DeMars, a veteran operator known for behind-the-scenes power plays. She hadn't spoken to him in months. "Jasmine," he said, voice low and steady. "This thing's grown teeth. If you walk into that hearing and double down, you won't just be taking on the president. You'll be calling out half this committee's donors. I need to know, what's your endgame?" She took a breath. Then answered, calm and certain. "My endgame is the truth." "Isn't that supposed to be the point?" A pause. "Be careful," he said. "Power doesn't just push back. It erases." That stayed with her. Back in Dallas, local news showed protesters gathering outside her district office, half in support, half calling for her resignation. The divide wasn't just political, it was cultural. To some, she was a truth teller. To others, a threat to the old, unspoken rules. That night, alone in her apartment above a bakery in D.C., Jasmine left the TV on low, watching a muted replay of her testimony. She glanced at a sticky note on her fridge, a message from her mother years ago: "Be the woman you needed when you were 12." That fear didn't mean stop. It meant pay attention. To 10:18 p.m., she got a text from a Republican aide she'd barely known. During freshman orientation. Off record, 2 committee members meeting with White House counsel tomorrow. They're planning to hit you with a procedural violation, claim you leaked classified attachments. She stared at the message. The playbook was old. When you couldn't disprove the facts, you discredited the messenger. The next morning, her legal team preemptively filed a formal statement with the Ethics Subcommittee, detailing the classification status of every file. Complete with timestamps, clearance tags, and clerk confirmations. It was airtight. But politics wasn't about airtight. It was about perception. By noon, word reached her that the White House had requested access to her law school records, hunting for anything to plant a headline, a missed exam, a disputed citation. Jasmine laughed. "They're looking in the wrong place," she told her assistant. The only scandal from that era was how many ramen packets I lived on. Still, the weight pressed in. The hearing was 48 hours away, and no matter how clean her files were, she knew the room she'd be walking into wasn't built to protect truth tellers. It was built to preserve power, but power weakens when enough people start asking the right questions. And Jasmine had made sure those questions couldn't be ignored. The night before the hearing, Jasmine Crockett boarded a flight to Dallas. No press, no schedule. She landed at 10:17 p.m., knocked on her father's door. Harold Crocker didn't ask questions, he just opened the screen door and wrapped her in a hug, the kind that made you feel like the world could burn and someone would still hold on to you. They sat in the dimly lit living room. Same old carpet, same coffee table with a scratch shaped like Texas. The ceiling fan clinked like it always had. Comfort wasn't luxury here, it was memory. Her father poured 2 glasses of sweet tea. "You good?" he asked. Jasmine nodded. Then stared out the window at the flickering street lamp. "I don't think they want the truth, Daddy," she said finally. "I think they want to break me." Harold took a long sip. "Of course they do," he said. "You're dangerous to them now. You stayed calm. You stayed smart. You didn't back down. He leaned forward. You don't fight fire with fire, baby. You fight it with water. But you better expect the smoke. It'll burn your eyes before it clears. She felt the tears push up. Let one fall. Just one. They talked for another hour. Not about politics. About old teachers. Her mom's sweet potato pie. Her brother pretending to be a lawyer in the hallway. It grounded her. Reminded her what mattered. The next morning, she was back in DC and the storm was waiting. I'm not asking you to agree with me, Jasmine said, meeting each of their eyes in turn. I'm asking you to read the same files I read. Look at the same numbers. Then ask yourself if you'd be comfortable explaining this to your voters. Shane Kinley, the Republican from Montana, exhaled and nodded. I did. And no, I wouldn't be. She hadn't come looking for endorsements. In moments like this, even silence from the right people was power. It meant fewer attacks. It meant room to move. That night, Jasmine stood alone in the hallway outside her apartment, key in hand, steadying her breath. She knew the moment she crossed that threshold, it was game on. No more breaks. No more safe spaces. Her phone buzzed, a text from her communications director, press outside. 4 networks. Holding questions till after the hearing. She didn't respond. Instead, she unlocked the door, stepped inside, and sat at the kitchen table. No notes, no rehearsal. Just her laptop screensaver, a photo of her and her niece on the front steps, eating popsicles. No makeup, no cameras. Just life. That was what she was protecting. And that was what they had forgotten. She wasn't here for showmanship or a legacy. She wasn't chasing headlines. She was standing up for something plain and basic, the right of people without billion-dollar tax shelters to know what was being done in their name. But she didn't yet realize who would try to stop her from speaking, or what it would cost. The morning of the hearing, Capitol Hill hummed, but not in the usual way. This wasn't just about Jasmine Crockett anymore. It had become about how many people were watching. Voters, veterans, single moms, truck drivers, folks who'd never tuned into a budget hearing in their lives were now streaming it on their phones. The room filled before sunrise. Reporters, podcasters, and live streamers wedged into corners. Outside, a crowd gathered behind metal barricades, some waving in Truth Matters signs, others shouting into megaphones about conspiracies. Inside, it was cold, tightly controlled. At exactly 9 a.m., Chairman Ridley gavelled the room to order. Jasmine sat at the witness table, folders stacked, hands folded. No fidgeting. No nerves. Just someone prepared to tell the truth, and surrounded by people hoping she wouldn't. Ridley cleared his throat and read from a prepared statement. Before we begin, it's important to note that certain materials previously introduced in public hearings are now under procedural review. Further reference to those documents may constitute a breach of conduct. A warning disguised as process. Delivered like a threat. Jasmine didn't flinch. I understand, she said evenly. But the truth doesn't care about your process. A murmur rippled through the room, gasps, a half-choked cough. Then the questioning came, sharp and relentless. Where did you get the draft budgets? Did you verify their classification? Why didn't you report them internally first? She answered each plainly, with dates, emails, and printed records she'd brought herself. No grandstanding. Just facts. Then came the setup. Representative Glendon Wright, Missouri Republican, staunch Trump loyalist, leaned forward, voice syrupy. Congresswoman, you seem very sure of yourself. But isn't it possible, just possible, that your staff mishandled sensitive files in their eagerness to make a point? A trap. One she saw coming. Jasmine gave a slow nod. Anything's possible. But not everything's true. She slid a folder toward the clerk. This is our full chain of custody documentation. Every file logged, timestamped, signed by official staff. And I'll remind this committee, I'm not just a congresswoman. I'm an attorney. And unlike some, I read the fine print. Wright opened his mouth, then shut it. The chair flushed red. Reporters' pens scratched faster. Then, from the other side of the dais, an unexpected voice. Representative Lynn Novak, a Republican from rural Iowa, no moderate, no media darling, cleared his throat. I've reviewed those documents. My staff confirmed the math with former CBO analysts. The numbers hold. Whether we like the optics or not, the content checks out. The room stilled. Novak wasn't a defector by nature. And now, on the record, he was saying she was right. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't smile. Just gave him a short, steady nod. That was when the dam cracked. By afternoon, headlines had shifted, Crockett's claims hold under fire. Pundits who dismissed her as reckless softened their tone. One even said, maybe we owe her a second look. Phone lines lit up in congressional offices. Constituents wanted answers, not angry sound bites, not deflections. Why had the budget been rewritten behind closed doors to reward billionaires and gut public programs? At a town hall in Spokane that evening, a Republican congressman was booed for defending the exemptions. It wasn't a liberal crowd. It wasn't organized. It was voters of regular people, and they weren't buying the old script anymore. Back in D.C., Jasmine left the hearing through a side door. No cameras. No microphones. Just her, walking alone to her car. She climbed inside and sat for a long moment. Her phone buzzed. A message from a number she didn't recognize. They're going to try one more time. Be ready. But this time, she wasn't alone. This time, America was watching. And that changed everything. The final blow didn't come from a committee ruling, a press leak, or even the White House. It came from inside. 2 days after the hearing, a mid-level staffer from the House Budget Office named Landon Shaw, mid-30s, unknown to the public but well-regarded on the Hill, quietly resigned. No press conference. No statement. Just a letter submitted at 4:12 p.m. on a Friday, when no one was supposed to notice. But attached to that letter was a sealed affidavit. And inside it, the confirmation Jasmine had been waiting for. The affidavit verified everything she'd claimed. The budget documents were real. Edits had been made, not as corrections, but under direct pressure from Bayfield and another advisor whose name hadn't surfaced publicly. Until now. Garrett Nolan. A longtime political fixer with a trail of shell corporations and off-the-books financial deals, Nolan was directly connected to a Florida redevelopment fund that had quietly reaped millions from the very tax carve-outs. Under investigation. By Sunday, the press had the document. By Monday, Jasmine Crockett wasn't a controversy anymore. She was the lawmaker who cracked open the largest ethics investigation into a presidential budget in modern history. But it hadn't come without a cost. In the days following Shaw's affidavit, the threats escalated. It wasn't just angry emails now. A tinted SUV followed her home 2 nights in a row. Her office was evacuated after receiving a suspicious envelope, thankfully a false alarm. Staff began rotating shifts for safety. Her family begged her to step back, just for a while. She refused. I can't back off now, she told her father over the phone. Not when we're this close to something real. Because what she'd uncovered wasn't just corruption. It was a system. A blueprint for quietly siphoning public funds into private wealth, hidden behind layers of policy jargon and economic theory. Most people never noticed because it didn't show up in headlines, it was buried in footnotes. But Jasmine had made people look. At a town hall in Phoenix, a mother of 3 stood up, tears in her eyes. My son's school hasn't had working AC in 5 years, she said. They cut the repair funding, so someone could build condos in Palm Beach. The room fell silent. That's when Jasmine realized it was never about a headline or a committee win. It was about helping people see what had always been there and giving them the words to name it. Letters began arriving by the hundreds. From postal workers, veterans, single dads, students drowning in debt. Most weren't about politics. They were about broken trust. About believing no one in Washington cared about people like them, until now. One message read, "You made me feel like somebody in that room was fighting for us. Thank you." Another said, "I never thought I'd understand a federal budget hearing. But you made it clear. And now I'm angry." That was when she knew she'd done something bigger than exposing fraud. She'd started a conversation. And people weren't just watching anymore. They were asking questions. At her next press conference, Jasmine stepped up to the microphones and said something different. "I don't want you to just trust me," she told the crowd. "I want you to check me. Check all of us. Hold us accountable. Make us explain where every dollar goes. Because we don't own that money, you do." The room stayed quiet, not from shock, but from respect. A journalist from Sacramento asked if she had any regrets. Jasmine paused. "I regret how long we let this happen without pushing back. But now that we're awake," she said, "I won't let us go back to sleep." By week's end, 5 more lawmakers, Democrats and Republicans both, had joined the call to audit every major tax carve-out from the last 2 administrations. Real bipartisanship. They called it the Crockett Clause. She didn't care what they named it, only that it got enforced. A month later, back in Oak Cliff for her niece's birthday, Jasmine stood at the grill with her father, flipping burgers under the Texas sun. No cameras. No headlines. Just family. Her niece tugged at her sleeve. "Auntie Jazz, are you famous now?" Jasmine knelt down, smiling. "Nah," she said softly. "I just told the truth really loud." Then she leaned in. "And I made sure they listened. Because the truth costs something. But silence costs more. And if this story moved you, if it made you think, pass it on to someone else who still believes accountability matters. Because stories like this only survive if we keep telling them."